Good morning, Tekoa Church. Grateful for Dustin for being willing to share his story with us, and it's been great to get to know him over the last year and all that God has been doing in his life, and as he's given God his yes, what he's done. My name is Austin. If we haven't met, I'm the lead pastor of Tekoa Church, and I want to let you know, if you are here looking for God, that he is already here, and we are here, yes. We are here as a church to connect you to him so that you can find and live out your purpose. If you're here for the first time, I would love to meet you after service. We hang out in the coffee lounge, and I would love to meet you. We even have a free gift to say thank you for joining us today. Now, this week, we're continuing our series with week 2. We're talking about 7 sins, the 7 deadly sins, and what they are. And the church set these up as, hey, you know what, we think these 7 sins are the ones that lead to every other sin that we commit, and these ones lead to death in our life if we follow these. But what I want you to know before we even get into this is, yes, while these sins lead to death, and while it might be a little hard and difficult to focus on them for a little bit in a season even as a church, and to let God deal with them, the reason we're looking at them is not to make you feel bad about all the sin in your life, is because when you let God deal with them and remove them from your life, the life we get to live on the other side is a life filled with so much more joy and life and goodness, and that's what God has for us when we trust in him. So today we're talking about the sin of sloth. I think this is something that all of us struggle with, and my tagline for this is faithful, not fearful. Faithful, not fearful. I think fear has a lot to do, we're going to see that in our passage today. Fear has a lot to do with why we have the sin of sloth in our lives. It often comes from a place of fear, but God calls us to step out in faith, and he responds and has good things for us when we do that. And I think some of us, right, we relate to the sloth, the animal. You can throw up those pictures. You know, we like to be slow, maybe a little bit lazy. We like to sleep in the morning. I know I can feel that way sometimes. Like I feel like the sloth over there, and that's who I am, and I get that. I relate to that. Others of us, maybe we relate a little bit more to the rabbit. That's from the movie Zootopia. It's a really funny scene where the sloth is going super slow, and the rabbit just keeps trying to push forward despite the slowness of the sloth. And I think some of us are like that in life. And what I've discovered this week as I've wrestled through this topic in this passage is the rabbit is being and exhibiting the sin of sloth just as much as the slow sloth is, oftentimes. Because we're so busy, we miss what God has for us to do. I'm an equal opportunity offender. I offended the rabbits and the sloths in the room this morning. But that's right, I have good news for all of us, no matter which one you identify more with. So before we jump in, let me define sloth for us, because I think that will help. Sloth is not doing what God has called you to do. Not doing what God has called you to do. And sloth is about our actions in relation to God and his kingdom. It's about living out our purpose and our calling in life, and we're exhibiting the sin of sloth when we're not doing that, not living that out. And that happens both generally as Christians, we know that how we're supposed to live, but also God has a specific purpose for each and every one of us, and we're supposed to live that out. Another way of saying it is not doing what needs to be done when it needs to be done. You could be a procrastinator, you could be a hard worker, but if we're either so busy doing the wrong things or we're just so lazy and not doing the right things, we're exhibiting this. The opposite of this is faithfulness, and we're going to see that in our passage today, to be faithful. And the good news is when you let God take this out of your life, you get to live with less anxiety and fear, and you also get to live in the promise, it says, of sharing in God's joy. One more thing I want to get out of the way before we jump into our passage today is the difference between sloth and greed. We're going to talk about greed next week, but they're similar ideas, and so I think even wrestling through it with the team this week, we were talking back and forth. What's the difference between these? Sloth is much more about us and what we do in relation to God and his kingdom. Greed is much more about us and our possessions and our things, whether it be money or possessions. But greed is much more about us and getting for us. Sloth is much more about God and doing or not doing what we're supposed to do for him and the purpose that he has for us, and he has given each of us a purpose. Let me remind you as well why we're talking about this If you follow Jesus, the Bible says, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. Right, so it says, put off your old self that's sinful. This week we're talking about sloth. It says, let the Holy Spirit renew you and your way of living. That's key. It's not in your own power. It's God that gives us the strength and the ability to live differently. And lastly, put on your new nature, holy and righteous. This week, that's diligence or faithfulness is the new nature that we're supposed to put on. Faithfulness to God's direction in your life. So I'm going to invite us to do something a little bit different this morning than we often do here. If you are able, I want to invite you to stand up with me as we read Scripture this morning. It's a way for us to just show reverence and honor to the Scripture and to God. It's a little bit longer of a passage today, but I want you to read this. You don't have to read it out loud, but we're going to read this together. I'm going to read it for us. For it will be Matthew 25, verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents here. I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Will you pray with me this morning for our time together? God, we invite you in, Holy Spirit, that you would speak to us this morning. Pray that you would be in my words and you would be in the ears of everybody here this morning, that they would hear what you need them to hear, God. And I pray that this message would not be a burden, but an encouragement to our church, that you have good for us when we trust you, God, and that you have a way forward for us no matter what we're struggling with, no matter what we're dealing with. So be in our time together this morning. Amen. You guys can grab a seat again. Now, I'm going to walk through this mostly just from the top. I'm going to walk through this, and I want to point out a few things to us. Now, the first is the talents are the things that God gives us. They're his gifts and his calling for us, the purpose that we're called to live out, the things we do in relation to God and his kingdom, his church, the world, how we serve him, the things we do in worship for him, his purpose for us. And that's why Tekoa is here. I mentioned this. Our mission is to connect people to God so they can find and live out their purpose. We're here to help you find your purpose. We're here to walk alongside you living it out. And we believe all of that ultimately comes from being connected to God, being connected to Jesus. So let's note a few things about this parable. What do we first observe? Verse 14, it says that God put his trust in us. He entrusted to us. God has given to us. And he's given with a trust, right? If I give to you, if I give to my daughter maybe some responsibility or I give her something, there's a trust that she's going to be responsible with it. God has given to you, he's given to us, and there's a trust that you're going to do the right thing, the thing he calls for us to do in response for us. He's entrusted property to us. They were Bond servants is what they were. They had traded years of service as payment for their lives to work off the debt that they had to somebody else. The master would take care of them in response to their payment. And we see in verse 15 that he gave different amounts to each person. Now, they were given a talent. You might wonder, okay, what is a talent? Like, how much money is that in today's terms? Well, I don't have a number for you because a talent wasn't a form of money. It was a weight. So you could have a talent. It's like a ton. It's not actually a ton, but it's like that, saying they had he gave one a ton, another one 5 tons, another one 2 tons. He gave them a weight of money, and if it was gold, it would have been millions of dollars in today's money, each talent. If it was silver or bronze, that obviously would have been less. The point is not the amount exactly, other than that it was a lot. The point is that he gave different amounts to each one, and they were entrusted with a lot. And we know what God has done. And we know that even for ourselves, right? We know that we are not like any other person exactly in this world. And God has given to us and built us and created us each uniquely and differently. We see, though, in the end, in the next few verses, that despite the fact that they were given different amounts, the expectation is in relation to what they were given, not as like a general number. Like everybody needs to come back with 10, and if you don't come back with 10, like that's not enough. We see an equal response to the one that came back with 10 as the one that was given 4. And so what we see is our response is to be faithful with what God has given us, no matter what that amount is. We're not supposed to exhibit even the other sins, right? It can be so easy of like jealousy or envy. We'll talk about those later in the series of like, but I want the 5. Like, why didn't you give me 5, God? I only have 2 over here. It's so easy to do that, to want what somebody else has. But God doesn't care, and his expectation for you is not based on that person. And if we try to live our life like that person, and even if we try to come back with 10, and we're working so hard for the 10, God doesn't expect that. He just expects a faithful response from us. Faithfulness is what was important. So let's look at the 2 different responses. Let's start with the faithful servants this morning. We're going to start with them. It says one traded 5 into 10 and the other 2 into 4. The first thing to notice about this is it says that immediately those 2 went to work. In our translation, it says at once they went to work and traded and started making more. There wasn't a waiting for the future. There wasn't a waiting for one time, right? Immediately they went to work. And as a pastor, I see this in the difference in people's lives all the time. And I was thinking about this week, and a family that I thought about was a family that joined us for our grand opening. They came to the church. They had just moved to San Jose, and immediately they jumped in. They joined the group that my wife and I host. One of them served up in kids. One of them helped with the lights here in the auditorium, and they were just instantly all in and generous with what they had. And the crazy thing I found out as I got to know them more was one of them was in med school. If you ever thought, like, I was busy in life, like she was busy in life, but they had decided when they moved here, they hadn't done it in the past. In other places, they had moved all around, but they got here and they said, you know what, I'm going to jump in, and I know that this is important. I'm not going to wait. And I think it'd be so easy to be like, I'm in med school, I'm so busy, but you know what, I'm setting myself up for the future. Later, I'll make a bunch of money. I can be generous with my money when I get a lot. I'm going to help people with my life. Like, so what I'm doing right now is really important. Like, I'll wait for the future. But instead they said, no, I know God called me not to wait, but to be responsible now. And it's crazy how much God blessed them in their response for that and set them up. What they're going to have down the road is so much more than if they would have just worked harder right now and waited for the future. They immediately went to work. And they both double it. And what I want us to look at is the response they get from the master, the response they get from God, which is identical for each of them. There's 3 things that God does in response to them. The first is he says, well done, good and faithful servant. You don't get a thank you from God, you get a well done, and an encouragement to keep going. Some of us, I think we do something for God and we expect a big thank you, but God doesn't owe any of us anything. And that's where that thank you expectation comes from of like, oh, I did something for you, God, now you owe something back for us. God has done so much for us, we could never repay what he has done for us. He doesn't owe us a thank you. But God is generous, and what he does give us is a well done and an encouragement to keep going that, hey, they're doing the right thing, and God is with them as they do that thing. And what I've learned as I've gone in ministry more with my life, even when I wasn't working as a pastor, matter of fact, I had to not work as a pastor for a time to see this. God had to remove it from me so that I could see, you know what, it's a privilege to get to do ministry. I wake up at 5:30 every Sunday and help set up, and some of the team does as well, and we do service, and then we tear down. And I do that every week, and it's not a burden. I don't say that of like, feel sorry for me, but I get to do it. And what I get to do each week is impact people's lives, and it's amazing that I get to do that. It's a privilege, and it's important that we change our perspective. We say, okay, thank you, God, that I get to be a part of what you're doing. God doesn't owe us a thank you. What he does is he says, well done, and we need to be grateful that we get to be a part of what he's doing, and I'm grateful that I get to be a part of the good he's doing to change our city and change our world. Second, he says, you've been faithful over a little, you get much, you get more even. God gives more to those who are faithful to him. You eliminate sloth from your life and have more of the virtue of faithfulness, God will give you more. It's a kingdom principle here. The more you are faithful with, the more God will give you. You know, I think of even, right, the story we just heard of Dustin. In this series, we've got people in our church being vulnerable to share the ways they've struggled in their past and what God has done with that. That's responding not in sloth of, I don't want to share. It's saying, you know what, I'm going to be faithful, God. It's maybe a little uncomfortable, but I'm going to trust you. I guarantee you what God's going to do with that is going to bless them and give more to them because they're responding in faith to him. You know, we might even say, okay, that's unfair. Like we read this and sometimes I'm like, why did the one that got 5 get even more at the end of the parable? Like maybe at least give it to the one that only got 2 at the beginning, right? But it's a kingdom principle that I think both of them would have gotten more. Like this is just a story, it's an example, but it's a principle that when we're faithful, God will give more to us. The opposite is also true. We'll talk about this in a minute. He takes away from the one that is not faithful. We need to be faithful. Third, he says you get to enter into the joy of your master, the joy of God. The more we do for God, the more we get to experience the joy of God. And this has been a theme for our church this fall. It's not something I picked. It comes out of the scripture every week that God has been bringing me to, that when we follow God, he wants and gives us joy. And we get to experience joy when we're faithful with what he has given to us. He says you get to enter into your master's joy. He gives joy to those who abide in him. We talked about that. He wants to give you joy, and he does for those that are faithful. He does it in this parable as well. So he says, well done. He says, I'm going to give you more responsibility for those who have been faithful. He says, enter into the joy of God. And when I think about this principle, I think about a defining moment in my life. And even my journey of my calling to become a pastor, my calling to even preach the word of God. I had stepped out in faith and I found myself in the northern part of India in the mountains where they make literally the best tea in the world, the most expensive tea in the world, although it's really cheap right there. I didn't find out it was expensive till I got home and wanted to keep drinking it, and I said, maybe I don't want to keep drinking it. But I was there in the mountains, and I had been prepping. I was with a team of 7 other people, and all of us had been prepping like we knew at some point we'd get a chance to preach a sermon to a church. And so I had been prepping for a couple months a message that God had been working in my heart and prepping, and I didn't know when I would get to share it, but I'd been prepping. And our translator told us, okay, tomorrow we're going to go to this little village where they grow tea. We'll go to one of the tea farms, and you'll get to, one of you preach. And my team said, okay, Austin can preach first. And I said, great. So it was that morning. We knew that afternoon we were going to go out, and I'm in my morning prayer time with God. And I'm just praying, like, right, I'm a little nervous. I'm going to, preach for the very first time I've ever preached to a church in my life. And I was, okay, I'll go over, I'm praying with God, and I just felt God say to me, that's not the message for this church. And I said, but that's the one I prepped. Like, if it's not the message, then somebody else should give it. And God said, no, I have a different message for you. That's not what they need to hear. And I said, are you sure? Like, I got to preach this afternoon. I'm already nervous enough. And so I went to my team leader and I said, hey, I think I need to write a new message today. Can I not do what we're supposed to do today and prep this? She said, sure, go for it. So I stayed back, and I'm like, literally, I had a notebook because I had no computer or anything, and I hate writing by hand, and my arm was tired. And I said, I'm going to write a new message. And I'm like, this is going to be horrible, God. I'm going to have to read from my notebook because I didn't have any time to prep this. And I prepped this message, and we went to the village, and it was this little house, and it was just a house church. There was like maybe 20 people crammed into the one. There was like a 2-room house, so we all crammed into like the living room of this house. There was kids literally climbing in windowsills and on couches. It was crazy. And I preached the message that God had changed for me. And we got to the end, and my translator asked me 3 times. He said, did you know what happened here? And I'm like, I don't, what do you mean? What happened here? Right? And I'm like, that wasn't that great of a message. Like, am I in trouble? Like, what happened? Like, it didn't go that well. And he's like, again, he asked me, did you know what happened here before you came? And I'm like, no, like, what happened? And he tells me, he said, this little church lost one of their elders this week. Like 3 or 4 days ago, he died, and they're in mourning and grief right now. And the message that I preached to them was that if you go to God in hard times, he shows up for you, and he cares for you, and he's with you. The message I had been planning to preach was we're supposed to love and do for God and in the world. And both of those are 100% true. That was the last thing that church needed to hear. The last thing. And what they got instead, because I was faithful, was God sending some random little white kid to their village saying, God says, I love you so much, I had to send somebody from across the world to tell you I'm with you. You might feel remote and isolated here in your little village, but I'm with you. And I got to experience what this parable says because I was faithful. I went through the work. I had been putting in the work. I could have said, I already did the work, God. I spent 2 months prepping this. But I put in more work when God said put in more work, and I changed what I was going to do, and I got to experience that. I felt God say, well done, faithful servant. And then I got invited to preach more and other opportunities I wasn't supposed to get, right? I got more responsibility because I had been faithful with what God had already given me. And then I got to completely, God didn't even need to do anything else. I got the joy of God in that moment of saying, I got to be there for somebody that needed me to be there. And you don't have to be a preacher to experience that. Maybe it's just encouraging a friend. Maybe it's stepping out and, setting up a kid's classroom or just being there for a family. The things that we do and we're faithful for, we get to experience the joy of God. And when we're faithful, God gives us more. This is what happens. But before we finish, we have to look at the opposite as well. Let's look at the slothful servant and what happened to him, because the more I've studied this week, the more I've realized I haven't talked enough about this. I haven't looked enough about this. It says, the one that got 1 talent, it says, so I was afraid and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what's yours, master. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. I want us to see a couple things. He was afraid, so he hid it in the ground. Fear does not have a place for us that follow God. We are no longer slaves. We are children of God. We are servants, yes, in his kingdom, but in a place of honor in the house, not a place of captivity. There is no place for fear for those of us that are following God. We don't have to fear because he's a good father to his children. Yes, he will discipline his children, but there's no fear needed in that. And what I want you to see is that fear here and anxiety of this person, I think fear often leads to anxiety. They lead him to hide the talent. What I want to ask you is, what might you be hiding and not bringing to the light to let shine because of your fear or your anxiety? Because you're afraid of something. And what I want you to see in this passage is that fear leads to Jesus calling him wicked and slothful. Fear leads to sin. It's an important principle. Fear will lead us to sin, and so we need to let God remove the fear from our lives and respond differently so we don't get led to sin. That's what happens in our lives when we let fear and anxiety, we get led to sin. It happens with sloth all the time, right? The reason most of us procrastinate or veg out or whatever is because there's an anxiety and we don't want to tackle with what's coming. Or the opposite, we're the rabbit trying to do everything. We're busy, we're committed to our jobs, we're committed to our families and our lives, and we're doing all the things, but it ultimately comes from the fear of not doing enough, not being good enough, not getting to where we want to go, or not having enough. It comes from fear. Fear leads us to sin. You need to believe that God has enough for you. It says, but grace has been given to each of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. The church is the body of Jesus. The church is supposed to be working together to build itself up in love, working together. The one with one talent tries to justify hiding it and not doing anything else. You know, we see those people, maybe we're that person, right? We think, I'm just trying to be prudent with my money. I'm just trying to, not lose it, God. I didn't want to end up with less, and so I just kept it to myself. This is a human response. You know, we like to make excuses. Like with sloth, we often avoid what needs to be done. Maybe we make the excuse of, I don't want to experience burnout. I need some rest. We're avoiding hurting someone. Now, there's an appropriate type of rest. Don't go to burnout. I'm not preaching that right now. Let me realize what I just said there. That's not right. But we're so afraid of something that we don't move in the first place. And I talk to people like, if I step out in faith, I might end up like that person, or I don't want to be over there, or, I'm afraid of failing. What I want you to see is God does not upset with those that fail. He doesn't put them in trouble. The disciples one time tried to, they got sent out by Jesus, and some of them tried to heal this boy that needed healing, and they failed. And they all came together to Jesus, and Jesus didn't say, you horrible people, get away from me. You're no longer disciples. You failed. He says, let me show you the way. Let me show you what it means to follow me. He's not upset at us failing. He's only upset if we don't try and we just go hide in fear. We can't just put it off. And it says that he sent the servant, worthless servant, into the darkness, into hell. What I want us to see before we move on is Jesus says, if you are so busy you're not doing the right things and committing the sin of sloth, if you're so lazy that you're not doing the right things, you're committing the sin of sloth, Jesus says both of those are a sin. And too often, I think I've been even in the church, too often I've done this, right? We invite people to live out their faith. We might say, that's the right thing to do, to be generous, or to give with our time, or to give with the things God has given us. And we think, that's the good thing to do, but I'm doing my thing over here, and that's okay. And what I've been confronted with this week is sitting doing nothing is not okay. Jesus actually calls that a sin. And if you're in that place, it's okay. The grace of Jesus lets you move forward and have a different path forward, but we need to be responding in faithfulness, or we are committing the sin of sloth. So what can sloth look like in our lives? Yeah, it can look like we're lazy. It can look like we're passive. We're procrastinating. But it's one of the biggest blocks we have to spiritual growth. That we step out in faith as those people that told their stories, stepped out in faith and told their stories to say, you know what, I'm going to be faithful and not fearful. If we have sloth, it often comes from being afraid. Let me invite the band up here as we force myself to wrap up here this morning. And what I want you to see, right, what else can sloth look like? Right? It can look like, hey, it's an acoustic worship week this week. That's not really my style. I'm just going to sit here. I don't want to worship. I don't want to sing. That can be what sloth even looks like. It can look like feeling like we should pray and not pray, feeling like we should help somebody that we see and not doing it. Sloth can look like knowing that we're supposed to be serving in church. It's not even just in church. Our calling, sometimes God calls you to serve somewhere else in your life. That's great too. It doesn't have to be in these walls. But we need to be serving and living out what God calls for us to do. If we're not doing it, it's sloth. It can be not prioritizing our spiritual health, like reading our Bible, being in a small group, or even just being at church on Sundays consistently. That's sloth taking root in our lives. So what can we do out of this? right? If having the gift or gifts from God and not using it is a sin, what do we do? How do we respond? Step one, learn your gifts if you don't know them. Like, that's okay if you don't know them, but if you don't take the effort to get to learn them, then you're never going to get to use them. So take the effort to learn to use them. If you don't know, just start doing good. And the things that God blesses and gives you more of are the things that you are gifted with and you're supposed to do more of. The second is to know God's calling specifically for you in your life. Take the time. I had a whole section, I might put it online this week, but I had to cut a bunch from my message for time today, but I had a whole section on Sabbath. You can even look that up online if you don't know what that is, but I think especially for the busy ones of us, there is a place of rest that we need, and if we're not taking the place of rest in Sabbath, there's no way for us to know what God is calling us to do. If I hadn't stopped that morning to meet God, and I was so busy, I was helping people all day. That's what I was supposed to be doing. And if I had been so busy ready to get started helping people that I didn't take the moment in the quiet to know what God wanted, I would have missed the bigger picture he had for me. If we're so busy and we're not resting, we miss what God has for us. And once we know it, we need to respond in faithfulness. We can't let fear reign in our lives. So then we use the gifts and we grow in them. And then we can expect that when we're operating that way, God's going to give even more to us. Not only that, we can expect that we get to enter into the joy of God and he's going to give us his joy. We get to know that there's good waiting for us. A healthy church builds itself up in unity. We need to live out our faith, though, right? There's a harsh warning that God gives for those that don't. Sloth sometimes leads to being too lazy or fearful to do the right things. Other times we're so busy that we don't know what God's calling us to do. Romans 12 says, "Do not be slothful in zeal, be fervent in spirit, serve the Lord." I want to leave you with this morning a few things, but what if you were all in on your faith? If you're not yet, that's okay. If you're here checking out the church or faith or Christianity, take all the time you need, and God's glad you're here. We're glad that you're here. But if you've chosen to follow Jesus, then what if you were really all in with your faith, if you really believed? Are you being slothful in your zeal? Are you being apathetic in your spirit as you serve God? It says you have been bought at a price. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price, so glorify God in your body. And it says that we went from a slave to sin to the freedom of God, and a slave to the righteousness of God, the goodness of God, so that we would no longer be enslaved to sin. For one who has died has been set free from sin. Now if we have died with Christ, we believe that we also live with him. Let not sin, therefore, reign in your mortal body to make you obey its passions. Do not present your members to sin as instruments of unrighteousness, but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as instruments for righteousness. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under the law, but under grace. You have moved from a slave to sin to a slave to righteousness. Your life is not your own. It was bought at a price. What will you do with your freedom and your new life? What will you do with the gifts that God has given you, the grace that he has given you? The good news is we don't have to do anything to get into heaven. But immediately following the parable of the talents, Jesus warns the people. It finishes with the warning, and then it goes further. It finishes everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But for the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Immediately following that, he goes on to teach more about the judgment of the world, and it furthers his point. What are you doing with your life? He says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty and give you a drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when you are sick or in prison did we visit you? Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these brothers, you did it to me." Are you all in on your faith? Do you take Jesus seriously? Are you using the gifts he has given you, or are you just focusing on something else? Are you afraid? You're fearful? You're letting sloth reign in your life instead of responding in faith? Are you wasting your life away, hiding in fear, not taking the talents and turning them into more? I want to invite you, commit to God to be faithful in response to Him. Work in partnership with the Holy Spirit. We don't have to do it alone. Work in partnership with His church and His body of people and believers. We're in this together. And be faithful and not fearful. And God is going to bless you. He's going to give you more. And you're going to get to enter into His joy. That's the good news for us. Would you pray with me? God, we want to enter into your joy. We want to have more of the goodness in what you have offered us. We want more of your Spirit. We want more of you in this life. Lord, we want to see you move more through us. We say thank you that we get to be a part of bringing your kingdom to this world. We get to be a part of your goodness and helping other people in this life. God, we want more of you. We say thank you that we get to do it. I pray that our church would be faithful with what you've given to us, God, and we would just respond and step out when you're calling us to step out. I pray that if you feel that prayer right now, you can make that your prayer in your heart, that if God tells you to do something this week, you'll respond and do it. If He asks you to give an encouraging word to somebody, if He asks you to help somebody, whatever it might be, that if God says, I want you to do it, that you'll respond in faith and do it. Some of you haven't received what God has given you. You haven't even received the talents yet. And He says, I want to give to you. And if that's you this morning and you've never put your trust in Jesus, because God says, you know what, you've all messed up in life, but that's okay. I sent Jesus. He was perfect where you couldn't be perfect. And He died the death that you deserved because God loved us so much. And Jesus rose again 3 days later because He had no sin in Him. And God says all we need to do is just put our faith and our trust in Him. If you've never done that and you say, God, I want to experience your goodness and I want to choose to follow you, and I trust in Jesus, what He did, would you just echo this prayer in your heart with me right now? God, I believe you sent Jesus for me. I believe He died for me and rose again to new life. And I choose to follow you, Jesus. And now I just pray that for our whole church, for everybody, if you just prayed that prayer or you've been a Christian for a long time, that God would just fill you with His gifts, His goodness, His grace this morning. May our church be overflowing as we respond in faithfulness to Him. Amen. Amen. Well, we're going to have a little bit more time for you to respond this morning. And I want to invite you to do that in a few different ways. You can do that by, maybe you feel like, hey, I do want to jump into what the church is doing. We have some teams that to make Sundays happen. You can be a part of those. You can sign up right now on our website on the Connect page, tekoachurch.org/connect. There's a link to let us know you're interested in jumping into, maybe it's one of our Sunday teams. Maybe you want to help with the homeless outreach we do in the city. We're putting some things together, and we'll keep you in mind for that. Or we're rehabbing an apartment right now for families in need. And maybe you're like, I like construction, or I like painting. I can do that. I can't build, but I can paint. Maybe you're like, I love building IKEA furniture. We'll keep you in mind when we get to that stage. But you could fill that out during service, even during our time together. Let us know. Maybe you don't know, but you say, I want to do something. There's a box for that too. We'll help you figure it out. If you want to respond right this morning in your giving, you can do that online or the boxes by the doors. That's part of our response to God. Say, hey, you've entrusted me with the finances you've given me. I'm going to be faithful with it and respond in gratitude for what you've done. And then another way is just to prioritize what we call the Tekoa 3, jumping into a group, joining our gatherings and building His house together with us. And then the team is going to start to lead us through a song. And I want to invite you, you can do any of those things. And as they start to lead us through this song, I want to invite you to just connect with God this morning. Just anything you need to pray with Him, if you need to confess anything to Him, if you want to ask Him of anything, connect with Him. There's communion on the side. You can take that at any point during the rest of our service this morning. The only requirement here is that you believe in Jesus and you've made Him Lord of your life. If you want to take communion, it's there. There's a little bread on the top and the cup underneath. And it's a way for us to remember even that we have been made holy in Him. There's nothing in our lives that is staining us anymore. We're pure and holy before God because of what Jesus did for us. And that's why we get to take communion. and that's what he's done for us. Also, if you want prayer, me and some of the team will be in the back. Any point during service, come on back. Doesn't mean if you come back you're struggling with sloth. If you want prayer for something in your life, come back. We'd love to pray for you. But spend some time before we just rush off to our lives and be the rabbit so busy about life. Spend a moment, meet with God during this time.